Today is January 16th, 2024. We are interviewing Adrienne Lichtig-Petruk. My name is Esther Finder. Ms. Petruk is in Fort Lee, New Jersey, and I am in Henderson, Nevada, in the United States, and the language will be English. Thank you for speaking with us today. What is your name, and can you please spell it?
My name is Adrienne Lichtig-Petruk, ADRIENNE LICHTIG PETROOK.
What was your name at birth? And could you spell that too?
My name at birth was Adrienne Eva Lichtig, ADRIENNE EVA LICHTIG.
Where were you born?
In Budapest, Hungary.
When?
November.
Both.
Budapest, Hungary, 1941, November 14th.
And how old are you today?
I am 82 years old.
What was your father's name?
My father's name was Elek, E-L-E-K, Lichtig.
And where was he born?
He was born in Eperjes, which sometimes, at the time he was born, it was called Czechoslovakia, but he was a Hungarian national. His language at birth was Hungarian, not Czech.
Would you spell the town, please?
Well, I'm only guessing at it. It's EPERJES. Sometimes there was another name that he called it. Oh, Prešov. Don't ask me to spell that. I don't know.
That's okay. Thank you. What work did he do?
My father was a sculptor by profession.
What was your mother's name?
My mother's name was Ilma, I-L-M-A, Roth at birth, and then Lichtig, Ilma Roth Lichtig. And she was born in Ungvar, which is sometimes called Uzhhorod. It was Czech when she was born, but right now it's in the Kiev. I mean, in the Ukraine.
What work did she do?
My mother studied in Paris to become a milliner.
What brought your parents to Budapest?
I think after World War I, my grandmother moved her family up to Budapest because she needed to work and she wanted to give up the large, land where she lived. And I think my father, I don't know. I'm not really sure.
Was your family religiously observant before the war?
Part of it, yes. Part of it, no. My mother's family, some of them were religious. In fact, one sister was so religious that she did wear a sheitel, and the first time she wrote on a Saturday was to leave a note behind that the Nazis were taking her now. But my grandmother was not religious, so even though they're sisters, she was not religious. Another sister who came to this country around the turn of the 1900s maintained a kosher home, and I think by today's standards, you would call her modern Orthodox. On my father's side, nobody was observant.
I realize you were very young, but what memories do you have from before the Nazis' occupation of your area?
The earliest I can remember is being in a shelter in a basement, hiding from the bombing, and I was always hungry apparently, and I used to ask for lekvad, which is like prune butter, what you would put in Hamantaschen on bread, and then I also have memories of when Hungary was being bombed. We were in Pest, so we crossed the Danube to Buda, which was higher up, and my father's mother, my father, an aunt, my mother, and I hovered together in one bed to keep warm because the windows were being blown out and it was the dead of winter. So I recollect that. And I also recollect my father. They had closed the chain bridge in Budapest. That's the dominant, most well known bridge. Because Hungary was going to be bombed, Budapest was going to be bombed, and they knew that that bridge would be a target. But I was a babe in my father's arms and apparently very cute. So my father talked the guardsmen into just letting him cross over, even after the bridge was officially designated closed, so that we could join the family. And I have recollections of that. That's about it from before the time that I was hidden.
Can you share with us some of the life changes that happened for you and your family with the invasion in 1944? How did it impact your family? What changes did you have to endure?
Well, my family moved as as the terrible events were approaching. My family moved to a very, very small apartment because if you had a large apartment, they would put families together. So we had the equivalent of today you would call it a studio apartment. I recall it being rather big, but it was still just one room, bathroom, and a small kitchen. So I recall that. And I don't know what other accommodation they had made. I knew that we downsized, but still maintained, as the Middle Europa people that we were, still maintained a housekeeper living in. She and I shared a foyer, and my parents had the primary room. So I recall that.
Were you an only child?
I was, yes. My parents thought that it was not a good time to expand a family. So, regrettably, I remained an only child.
Were any special plans made for you as the precious only child?
Plans in what terms? To safeguard me or? Okay. So, to safeguard me, um, my I don't know how parents can do this. It's so selfless and so difficult now that I'm a parent, but the philosophy was that the children must survive no matter what. And through my mother's brother, who worked with a Catholic woman, they identified somebody who lived in a little town called Buji outside of Hungary. It was really a little village of a few hundred people. And she would take me in for the duration of the war and take care of me so that even if my parents perished, I had a chance at surviving. And that's where I spent just about a year, never seeing my parents during that time. Being in this small village, I wasn't allowed to go outside because everybody would recognize that I was not native to that area. And she was at risk of being discovered harboring a Jew. So it was a difficult task for her as well. But for a whole year, I didn't go outside. I just, sometimes they hid me in the root cellar, sometimes I was allowed to come up. But to comfort me, I had a doll that I took from home. I still have that doll. And that was the only toy that I had as far as I can recall. The woman that took care of me was very young, probably just past her teen years, because some years ago, her family contacted me here in America. They tracked me down. And, well, they wanted to know if that was me, if I was alive, and that she took care of me. And they wanted me to help her be nominated as a righteous Gentile at Yad Vashem for her bravery in taking care of me. But they have a board of directors at Yad Vashem, and they sent me the paperwork. And I honestly responded to the questions, including compensation. This lady was compensated, even though she took risks, she was compensated during that time. And for years after, kept tracking my family for more. So I didn't think that she met the standards of being a righteous Gentile.
Do you remember the woman's name?
I think her first name was Ilona, but I never knew her last name. I should have gotten this ready for you. I had a picture of her somewhere.
We'll do photos later. Could you give me the name of the village again and possibly some spelling?
Yes, the name of the village is Buji, and I'm guessing at the spelling as Budgi or Gy. Hungarians spell things with a Y often, so it could have been Buji.
You mentioned you had your doll. Do you remember what else you took with you from home when you left?
When I left to be in hiding, or when I left to come
Yes.
to America?
Be in hiding.
In hiding. No, I don't. I don't remember being taken either. I just was there.
So you don't remember saying goodbye to your parents or what they might have told you?
No. No, I don't have a recollection of that. I remember the woman who took care of me made very good fried drumsticks, chicken drumsticks. It's the only thing I recall.
How did she treat you?
I don't remember being treated badly, so I guess I must have been treated okay. But it was lonely without other kids around, and, just this woman and myself. She probably treated me well.
How much contact did you have with your parents during this time?
None. My father was away in a forced labor camp, and the same woman that found this Gentile Ilona to hide me found false papers for my mother, so that my mother was able to move around in the open, maintaining my father's atelier. He had a studio of other sculptors working for them. And so, as I said, my father was in a forced labor camp until he escaped and hid in an elevator shaft for the duration of the time of the war. My mother, for some reason, knew where he was hidden in the elevator shaft, so she brought him food and laundry. And my mother was free to roam around because she had the false papers, so she went to carry on, to get food for him and to keep his business going.
Did you ever ask, or do you remember if you ever asked to see your parents or why you couldn't see your parents? Was there ever any explanation for that for you?
I don't have any recollection of that.
And the person who helped your mother get false papers, what was her name?
Her name was Elizabeth Salesh, and she worked in a textile firm where my uncle worked. And in later life, she became my aunt. My uncle married her. And she's the lady that gave me that doll for my first birthday, and a woman who I adored all of her life. She was a very, very special woman, all heart. Um, she took care of all of us. She got us sacks of flour and sugar when there was none to be had. She found a turkey somehow, I heard, and she tried to butcher it, but she was very little. In fact, my uncle called his pet name for her was Tiny because she was little. But her stature was very big, even if her physical size was not. She was an amazing woman.
While you were in hiding, how much did you understand about the war or about the danger you were in?
I was only 2 and a bit, so I don't think I had any understanding. I was less than 3 years old. So it's been told to me thereafter, but during the time I was experiencing this, I really had no idea.
What do you remember about your reunion with your parents?
The first reunion I remember, and it's probably not the very one when I reunited with my parents, but my grandmother and her 3 sons came to America just before Pearl Harbor. They arrived in America on the day that I was born, which was 3 weeks before Pearl Harbor. My uncle immediately enlisted in the army and was sent back to Hungary as an army officer of some kind. He was particularly helpful because he spoke the local language and he could assimilate into the spy world, which was very fertile in Vienna. Um, and so my uncle came to visit us, and that's the first recollection I have of my parents and my uncle being together. And what made it so memorable is my uncle's pockets were stuffed with Hershey bars. And that's my first recollection after the war.
What was your uncle's name?
His name was Victor Ross. He changed his last name from Roth to Ross at the behest of his wife, who felt more comfortable having a less Jewish name. But she's the one that helped us all survive.
So you remember this meeting. What about with your parents? What memories do you have of seeing them again after about a year?
Well, as I got a little bit older, I remember events in Hungary. They sent me to a French elementary school because they wanted me to learn to speak French. Both my parents spoke French fluently because they had lived in Paris for 6 years while they were studying their profession. Um, so I remember the school that I went to. I remember the housekeeper we had, Itza, who in 1985 I reunited with on a trip to Budapest. She remembered all the things I liked as a child. She used to walk me to school and she showed me where the school was. She remembered my favorite foods and prepared some to bring to me. Um, what else do I remember? I remember playing in, oh, my father would come home every night and do a little gymnastics with me, always asking if I was a good girl. And then I would be rewarded with a piece of chocolate every night. It was a ritual. Um, my parents had a lot of friends, and we would have family friends and visits. Once a week, my father would have all of his friends over for playing chess. They would play late into the night, they would play chess. Um, I remember some of the everyday things. I remember back in those days in the 40s when people didn't have vacuum cleaners, Itza would take the rugs up to the top of the building and beat it with a stick. And she would take the wash up and wash by hand. And once or twice a week, an iceman came and put ice into our ice box. So I remember those little things. Um, I don't remember too many friends from that time. The only friend I remember is one who was the son of my parents' dear friend, George. His name was George, or we called him Jojo when he was little. I recently saw him because we both came to America. So I visited him in within the last year.
What do you remember about leaving your rescuer? You had stayed with this woman for a while. Do you remember saying goodbye to her or anything like that?
No.
Is there anything you wanted to add about what happened to your parents while you were in hiding?
Well, of course, their life was threatened, and their main focus was to keep me safe and to keep themselves alive. Um, before the war, my mother in 1938 went to the Czech consulate and she put the name of herself and her immediate family on the list to emigrate to America legally. But when it was her turn or their turn to come, only my grandmother with her three sons were able to come because my mother was pregnant with me. And the doctor said that she was too far along to take on such a challenging trip, by sea and not knowing what would happen, the war, the world was not in good shape. And so she had to stay behind. Um,
So some of your family was in the United States and you told us about your parents. What happened to other members of your family? Did they survive the war?
the immediate family, yes. My father's mother survived the war and came to America on the Queen Mary in 1946 or 7. She already had a daughter here, who left Hungary, I don't know exactly when, but went to Cuba. I think her boat was diverted to Cuba, and she lived in Cuba but came to America. And my grandmother went to live with her in 1947, with her and her family, around 1947. So she survived. My mother's siblings, one was in France. She left Hungary before the war. And her other brothers came here. One of my father's sisters remained in Hungary all of her life. She died at the age of 103, still living by herself and fending for herself. Very strong lady. Um, so my father had three sisters. One remained in Hungary. One came to the US by way of Cuba. And the third one got out during the Hungarian uprising in 1956 and also came to America. So that's the immediate family for my parents. So both grandmothers were here. Both my grandfathers died well before I was born, so I don't know.
What can you tell us about post-war life in Hungary with this new
As
social order that you
as the communists were coming in? Well, my family my family were professionals going back many, many, many years. So they were financially comfortable. And we had a very nice life. You know, my mother would go to a dressmaker and have her dresses custom made, sometimes having dresses made for me to match her dresses. She would go to cosmetologists and, they would go to concerts and operas and theater. They lived a very nice life. They would go to cafes. They had, a gay, in the old fashioned meaning of the word, a gay life. They were content, except that my mother, who had wonderful antenna, was very aware that the communists were going to come in. I would come home from school singing songs that were taught that were communist tainted in the words. And that's what made my mother, who was more practical minded than my father, the artist, to say that we have to leave Hungary. And my father really didn't want to. The expression was that he was wedded to his credenza. In other words, he was attached to his home, whereas my mother saw the practicality of getting out of there. So, my uncle Victor, the one I spoke about earlier, remained living in Austria. He lived in Salzburg in the Tyrol. And my parents together hired a guide who was going to bring us to safety in Austria, in Vienna, after the war. So, all of this because my mother was very nervous about the communists and the Iron Curtain coming down. So, one day my mother came to pick me up after school, and she told me that today we're not going home. We're going to visit your grandmother, who lives in America. And she and I got on a train that took us to the outskirts of the end of the train line, where we met a guide that my parents had pre-hired. And the guide was to walk us from this little village across the barbed wire Iron Curtain to Vienna. We only had the clothes on our back. you weren't allowed to take any valuables out of the country because then you would be worse off than if you were just caught without anything. And I know that they planned on waiting until October to make this trip because we had to go across fields, cornfields. And in October, the cornfields would be high and we could walk between the shafts of corn. At the same time, there were beacons beaming down on us from high towers because they were looking for people that were escaping. And the guide knew where the curtain was, where you could get through, where there was a hole or some way out. And he also knew where the landmines were. Some years ago, there was a lot of talk when Princess Diana was trying to do away with the landmines that still remained. Anyway, he successfully got my mother and myself across the Iron Curtain, and we landed in the Rothschild Hospital, something that the Rothschild family had set up for escaping Jews, just like ourselves, to give us a little comfort until we were able to find our way. So my mother and I were in this my father stayed behind. He just couldn't commit. He couldn't make up his mind. And because my mother was such a strong woman, she felt that it's either my child or my husband. She's going with me, hoping that he would catch up at a later time. Anyway, after a few days at the Rothschild Hospital, my mother went down to the train station. I don't know what she used to bribe a conductor, but she bribed the conductor to hide us on the train in the cargo part of the train where they would have what do you call it? Where they transport animals, like a pen. And it was important to do that because border guards would get on the train at various stops and they would talk to the passengers. And of course, I couldn't speak German at the time. So it would immediately be revealed that we were not what our false papers said. And so he hid us. My mother bribed him in some way, and he hid us to get from Vienna to Salzburg on this train. Once we got to Salzburg, we would be okay because that's where my uncle was, and he was an American soldier. So we felt that we would have some security. And that's what we did. It was quite something when we arrived in Salzburg because my uncle was in München on his business, and we couldn't go and stay with him. So another relative of his was staying at the castle. If you saw The Sound of Music, there's a castle in the middle of a lake with water lilies all around, very beautiful, and a drawbridge. Well, we had the horse and buggy take us from the train station to that location. It's called Schloss Anif. That's the name of the castle. And the Americans had occupied it. And my uncle's relatives from his wife's side were already living there. And we got there. Late at night, they let down the drawbridge. It was really quite something. I remember it clearly. And we went to stay with them for a few days until my uncle came back from München and found us a pension in Salzburg.
Before we get too much further along the way, I have a couple questions still about Hungary. Do you remember any anti-Semitism after the war?
I remember that people had to wear yellow armbands with a star, with a Jewish star on it,
When?
leading up to the war and maybe during the war. I don't recall anti-Semitism in Hungary, but I wouldn't have been aware. I was still pretty young. Not only that, but I didn't know that I was Jewish. I was protected from knowing that I was Jewish until I came to America. When I lived in Salzburg, where schools were integrated with religious instructions, I had no choice but to learn Catholicism, as Austria is a Catholic country. And because I was at the age of First Communions, age 6 and 7, I had a First Communion with my friend Sylvia, not knowing that I was not Catholic. I thought I was. So we carried on this disguise for a long time. And it was only well into a year of living in America. We went to live in Forest Hills, which was Forest Hills was in Queens, and that part of the city was an upper middle class Jewish area where my grandmother had lived. We went to live with her when we first came to America. And I went to school, and all the kids were Jewish. And I told my mother, I wish I were like the other kids. I wish I looked like them. I wished I could dress like them. And I wish I could be Jewish like them. And that's the first time my mother told me. I was almost 10 years old, that I was Jewish.
One last question about Hungary, and then we'll come back to your
Mhm.
your trip, your travels. Um, I want you to think back about your time in Hungary. Is there anything that you haven't mentioned that you'd like to share before we leave that behind?
We wore uniforms to school. Um, the teachers were very strict. Um, I liked the Hungarian food. I remember going to the big marketplaces with either my mother or with Itza. Oh, and we used to go a lot to a place called Gerbo, or as the French would say, Gerbo, I think. It still exists, a beautiful pastry shop across the Elizabeth Square, which was in the center of town. And it was all glass and marble, um, and crystal. And we would go there for treats pretty often. My family liked sweets. So I remember that. Um, but in regards to all the horrors and the negativity during the invasion and the Holocaust, I was very well isolated by my parents and the family around me, that I wasn't that aware of what was going on. And don't forget, I was less than 3.
I have several questions, but let's continue on your journey. You've gotten to this Schloss,
Yes.
and can you tell us about your reunion at this point with your uncle and what happened next and where was your father? And can you tell us all the moving parts?
Yeah. My father remained in Hungary, but well, my mother was very cunning. Um, we left in October. My father's birthday was in early November. So my mother had me record a song in Hungarian, and Itza, our housekeeper, was to play the recording of my singing whatever it was that I sang on the morning of his birthday to wake him up and to remind him of me, because she wanted him to really get his act together and come join us. So I know that happened. Um, my father was caught and thrown into prison a number of times um, for political reasons, for trying to escape Hungary. But in the end, he did get through. When he got to Salzburg, the three of us lived in a one-room pension. My mother had a two-burner hot plate, and we had a potbelly stove to keep us warm. Didn't do that much, but we had a sink in the room, and maybe twice a week we could take a bath because you had to pay for your baths. And it was a community bath within the pension, but you had to pay to go. My mother made wonderful meals. My father worked during the day restoring a beautiful church in Salzburg. I think it was called the Dome. And he was doing his Michelangelo bit because he was on scaffolds reworking the ceilings. And in his spare time, if you look behind me, there's a portrait here of my mother, a relief portrait that my father made in 1949 while we were living in this pension as a pastime. I went to school with my friend Sylvia, and years later, it gave me the creeps when I went back to visit her and I realized that, she didn't know that I was Jewish and I felt uncomfortable. But while we lived in Salzburg, we spent a great deal of time with my aunt and uncle. They didn't have children until much later, so they treated me very much like their own. They've spoiled me very much. And they lived a good life. They were very comfortable. We had good food at their house. And my mother did well with the two burners. My mother went to work as a milliner in Salzburg while my father was doing the ceiling at the Dome. I went to school with the other kids. I learned to speak German fluently. Um, my uncle treated us very well. He would take us on the weekends to see the various regions of Austria. On one occasion, he took us to Hitler's Eagle's Nest. On another occasion, he took us to Königssee and a lot of different local places. And he also took us skiing. He taught me how to ski. In 1948 and 49, he took us to Kitzbühel, where I learned to ski with him. So those were nice times. We did celebrate Christmas in 1949 because my aunt remained Catholic, of course, and her family also gathered in Salzburg because of this aunt and uncle who took care of all the refugees. And I got my first pair of ice skates from my aunt and uncle. And we had a huge Christmas tree with angel hair and candles on it, things that the fire department wouldn't allow these days. But that was my aunt's influence, and she was much beloved by everybody because she was just such a good person.
During this time, where you didn't know that your family was Jewish, were you even aware that there were Jewish people?
No.
This was a different faith.
I
Did you
didn't.
have any comprehension?
I didn't even know that there was such a thing as religion. I just didn't. So.
And how long were you in Austria?
Well, we came to this country Thanksgiving 1950. And we got to Austria in October of 1948, I think. So 2 years.
You you wanted me to ask you about a birthday in Austria. Did you celebrate any birthdays in Austria?
I did. I had my 7th birthday and my 8th birthday in Austria, and my 9th birthday probably on the Liberty ship bringing us to this country. I'm sorry, but I don't remember about a birthday in Austria.
Maybe you were thinking of the one on board ship. When did you told me what year you left Austria, but why then? Why did you leave at that time?
We were registered again to come to this country legally, and our number came up, I guess, and we were taken to a DP camp in Bremenhaven, Germany, to await coming, to await being processed to come to the United States. And that was the worst trip ever. We were on the high seas for 13 days in the middle of a winter storm. There were no stabilizers on this Liberty ship. It was bunk style, separate for men, separate for women. And everybody was very sick. Everybody was sick. It was just awful. But it was free and it got us here. And as I said before, we arrived on Thanksgiving Day. So we couldn't disembark because the unions wouldn't, they were having a union holiday. So we waited until the next day to meet up with my grandmother and the rest of the family.
Do you have any idea who your fellow travelers were on that ship?
No.
Were they other refugees?
Oh, they were all refugees. Yes, they were all displaced persons. But it's the first time in my life on this boat that I ever saw or learned that there were people in the world that didn't look like me. Because there was, well, today you would call an African American man in the army, and I had never seen such a person. And he was very, very kind to me. He gave me something I never had before, which was an orange. I mean, in those days, there was no such a thing as bananas or oranges in Eastern European countries because it didn't grow there. And I had never seen an orange. And he gave me an orange, and it was just so amazing. Oh, I know about the birthday. Now I remember. While we were in the DP camp, I guess that's when I had my birthday. And I loved bananas, which were a unique and new thing for me. And I got a bunch of 6 bananas as a birthday gift. And it was the best gift ever because, it was just such a special treat. I learned about them first through my uncle because he would get them at the PX. So that's how come he had bananas in Austria, but regular people didn't have access to that.
Did your family have any difficulty getting the paperwork to come to the United States, or was there something about your family that made it a little bit easier for you?
Well, yes. One of the things that made it easier, my grandmother's sister came to this country around the turn of 1900s, as I mentioned to you. And her son, 2 of her sons, and their families sponsored us. So they took financial responsibility in case we were unable to make it on our own, to assume financial responsibility for us. And I think that made it easier. But they were very helpful to us once we took our first apartment. They gave us whatever cast offs they had in terms of furniture. And my father built the rest of it out of plaster. He built plaster benches, plaster bookcases, and my mother would make pillows for those benches. They were incredibly resourceful, I thought. I'm very proud of what they did. You know, we came here in 1950. We had this first apartment about a year after we arrived. We stayed with my grandmother for a year. And then we had this very nice apartment in a Lefrak building in Queens. And I went to the regular schools and I tried to assimilate. But by 1957, my parents bought a house. So we came to this country with $7 in our pockets. And within 7 years, they attained a goal or an achievement that many people spend much more time doing. But they were just so industrious and so creative and so willing to work hard that we had the American dream.
I want to flesh that out a little bit. When you were coming to the United States, what were your expectations? Or what were your first impressions when you got here? What do you remember of that period?
Well, I remember feeling an abundance of things that we didn't have much of during some of the times in Hungary. You know, there was an abundance of food, a tremendous variety of food that I had never seen before. I thought that the schools were very liberal in freedom in not being, the Austrian schools and even the Hungarian schools were very rigid, very strict. And here, children had breaks in their day, they had snack times. Um, I remember the school would give out free milk, but if you wanted Oreo cookies, you had to buy them for 2 cents a cookie. And we didn't do that because, first of all, my parents didn't know about that custom and they didn't have any spare money either. But the other students bought it and treated me to it because to them I was an oddity. I didn't speak any language that they did. And but they helped me learn English. It was a total immersion. So within a year and a half, I was very good at speaking English, and it's my primary language now. What I didn't like is because, we came with the clothes on our back. My grandmother had to sew dresses for me, and I hated that. I hated the fittings. I hated the dresses she made. I hated she would make lace collars and dye them in tea to take them away from being so white. And I just felt different and odd from the other kids. And that made me very self conscious and feel like I was a little bit less than because my parents seemed older and we all looked funny and we spoke a funny language, not a language like Italian, French, Spanish, a more common foreign language. Nobody speaks Hungarian outside of the borders of Hungary. It's hardly an international language. So I felt a little bit behind in my studies because I had a lot of catching up to do. I felt that I looked odd and didn't know the customs to fit in. It was a tremendous period of learning for me. Um, and the other alternative was I had a very beautiful cousin who lived in Philadelphia, which is where the sponsoring family lived. She was a few years older than me and much thinner than me, but she had beautiful dresses from Saks Fifth Avenue. And here I was, this immigrant girl. So I had her hand me downs. The problem was that she was very thin and I was very round. And they zipped me into those dresses, but I couldn't breathe. So I was uncomfortable. But it took me a long time to feel that I fit in, a very long time.
You talked about some of the adjustments that were challenging for you. What were some adjustments that were difficult for your parents?
Well, for one thing, they both had impossible occupations, my father more so. I mean, there are very few people that you know, even today, who make their living at being a sculptor. Fortunately, and I don't know how this happened, but at the time that my parents came here in the early 50s, Walt Disney was building, I don't know if it's Disney World or Disneyland, but whichever. And he needed sculptors to sculpt the figurines, which were then reproduced into plastic figures through a process called injection molding. But my father was lucky enough to hook up with the Disney company, and he made all the figures for It's a Small World, which is one of the displays. So that was amazing. My mother felt that there was no work that was beneath you. You had to do whatever you had to do to keep yourself going. So, whereas she was a hat designer and worked for haute couture design firms such as Lily Daché and I don't know the others in New York at the time, it was seasonal. And when she was unable to work in her own field, she went to work in a factory making snowsuits for children because she knew how to sew on the sewing machine. And she felt that working in a sweatshop wasn't beneath her because she needed to support the family. I think they had tremendous um, integrity and a very strong value system. I mean, somebody who would have had the background my mother had, where she came from a very financially comfortable family with lots of servants, and, you know, she was raised by her mother, but also governesses and what have you, not to sneer at working in a sweatshop and feel that it was quite all right to do that because it was to support her daughter and to contribute to the family. I I think that she had a lot of character for being able to do that. So,
When your family came to the United States, do you remember people asking about the war and what they went through in the war?
no, not in those early days.
Did that happen later?
Well, sure, as I became a teenager and older, people would ask about my background and I would talk about it. But when I first came here, I don't recall people asking about it.
When did you begin to realize the bullet that you dodged in the Holocaust? When did it dawn on you that Jews were targeted and so many were killed and you were lucky enough to get through?
I think it took a very long time. I think maybe even up until the point that I was going to college. It took a long time. My parents spoke about it from the time that I learned that I was Jewish, but they didn't dwell on it. They didn't speak about it that much. They had, after the Holocaust, some people became even more observant, whereas others felt that if there's a God, this wouldn't have happened. And that's the category that my father fell into. He was very rebellious about anything Jewish. Whereas my mother, who came from the more religious home, felt, well, we should have holiday meals, even if it's not with prayers and everything else. But I was not raised in a particularly Jewish home, um, although I married a man who came from an observant family. And it became more and more and more important to me over the years. By the time my daughter was born, I discussed it with her as soon as I thought she was old enough to understand that, that we're Jews, and that even though she was born in America where you think there's no anti Semitism, she should not be complacent and always remember my story, which I told her until I got eye rolls. And it's only recently, I think, that the eye rolls stopped. And she's realized what I've been telling her all these years, since October 7th, that she's very much on board and aware of her identity.
You mentioned previously that you didn't know you were Jewish until you were in the United States and, you were much older. Did your parents explain, or how did your parents explain why you didn't know this sooner, why they never told you sooner?
Well, it was explained to me that it was a matter of survival, that they couldn't tell me about it. But then they was my father more than my mother was so hung up on the whole thing that when I learned that I was Jewish, I wanted to go to Sunday school because my friends were going, and they wouldn't let me. And my friends wore necklaces with Jewish hearts on, stars on them, and they wouldn't let me. And they never wanted any outward show of our identity. And that stuck.
Before October 7th, did you experience any anti-Semitism or anti-foreign sentiments when you came to the United States and as you were growing up here?
The clearest recollection I have is that I went to a college weekend at Dartmouth, and I was on a train going through Connecticut all the way up to Rutland, Vermont. I was a senior in high school, I think, and I went to visit my boyfriend for Winter Carnival. And some girls got on the train. I don't know how the subject came up, but I told them that I was Jewish. And they were, as though they had just seen a ghost. I mean, they just couldn't believe it. They said, "You're Jewish? And your boyfriend's Jewish?" They couldn't believe it. So I kind of thought that was, if not anti Semitic, at least very ignorant.
What kind of education were you able to get in the United States?
Oh, I was so lucky. Um, After graduating from high school, I went to Syracuse University and studied fine arts and advertising and graphic design. And I say I was so lucky because that was in 1959 when my parents were in this country for 9 years. They sent me to a private university. Even today, it's one of the most expensive schools. I never had a student loan. I never had to pay back anything after school. My parents thought that it was so important that I get a good education and have a good future that I think years later I found out that sometimes they would have very, very modest meals to make sure that they could scrape together the money to send me to a private university. And it really had propelled my life because, as you know, in university, you learn your subjects, but you also befriend similarly inclined people, people who have a trajectory of becoming successful, who are interested in education and in developing a profession of some kind. And it enabled me to do that with the circle of friends that I still have today. I I think it was tremendous. I just can't believe what my parents were able to accomplish with such odd professions. I mean, really.
Can you share with us some of the highlights of your professional life?
Sure. After getting out of college in 1963, when women were still considered to be okay to be school teachers or secretaries, I was stubborn. I had a portfolio and a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. I was not going to become a teacher or a secretary. I walked up and down 42nd Street with my portfolio, high heels, and sheath dress for 6 months until I got my first job. And I said it had to be in an art studio or art related, even if it's just sharpening pencils. But my first job was at Vogue. And I was sharpening pencils, but I stuck to my guns. I'm very determined. And from there I went on to several design studio jobs and over the years developed my own business as well as working for 5 or 6 years for the CBS Broadcast Group and for MTV Networks at Nickelodeon. So I think that I had a nice, satisfying work life. Um, when I turned 60, my job was eliminated due to age discrimination. And my daughter read me the Riot Act. She said, I think it's time for you to become a real estate lady. I thought it was very good advice. I followed it up. And for the last 22 years, I have been a real estate lady in my second career. But I think it was fine. I don't recall any unhappiness about it.
You mentioned that you married and had a family. What did you tell your family about your early life and your wartime experiences?
You mean my daughter and my husband?
And any grandchildren?
Oh, okay. Well, for my grandchildren, I wrote a book about my experience and I had it published through Shutterfly so that there were 2 copies, one for each of their bar or bat mitzvahs. But I shared my story with my family. The grandchildren are more interested than my daughter, who would give me a lot of eye rolls. Um, my husband was very aware of it. He came to America to get away from having a traditional Jewish life. His parents were founders of a temple, and as I mentioned, they kept a traditional, modern Orthodox kind of a home, which is not something he wanted for himself. But um, I told him everything that I could. And we had a traditional home in the sense that we did observe the holidays, maybe not as religiously as other people, but we definitely notated all the holidays. My daughter asked to go to Sunday school, which she did. and she asked to have a bat mitzvah, which she had. Um, and it was important to me, not so important to her, but important to me, that she marry a Jewish person, which she did. And the children, my grandchildren, go to Sunday school. They enjoy their studies, and they're not observant, but they're very aware of their identity and very knowledgeable about their identity.
Have you spoken publicly about your experiences?
My grandson asked me to speak to his school, so I spoke to his classmates about it. But I had been asked to speak publicly, but I felt that as I was so little when the Holocaust actually occurred, that I might not have enough to contribute, that people wouldn't find it satisfying. I wasn't in a concentration camp, so I don't have that experience. I wasn't old enough to have suffered some of the injustices that were done to older people. So
You mentioned October 7th earlier. How have the events of October 7th impacted you?
well, I think well, needless to say, what's happening is horrific. I think that the atrocities are possibly even worse than during the Holocaust, the inhumanity of it all. And it continues my lifelong mantra that we must remain vigilant, and that um, it's important for me to keep the Jewishness going, which is why it was important to me that my daughter marry a Jew. And I don't know if there can be peace. It's just horrendous. I feel for the innocent children. It's unspeakable.
Can you share with us your thoughts about the rise in anti-Semitism on college campuses and elsewhere, and how it might have impacted you and your family?
Well, why there's anti Semitism? I don't know. I just don't know. Sometimes I've heard it said that people don't like Jews because they've been successful in a number of different endeavors. Relative to their population, they're overrepresented in the arts, in the financial world, in the cultural world. But I don't know. I think everybody would like to know, all the Jews would like to know why we're so hated and why they want to annihilate us. I just know that we have to keep putting one foot in front of the other on a daily basis and fight back and stand up.
Is there anything that we have not spoken about that you would like to include in this interview? Anything we didn't cover?
I cannot think of anything.
Okay. What message do you have for future generations who will watch this interview?
I think it's important to remain vigilant and just to keep our identity going and not to sit back and feel that we're going through a nice spell now, so anti Semitism is gone. It's not. It's just slightly beneath the surface. That's how it was in this country for many years. And then during the early Trump years, when we became more violent towards one another and less tolerant, it rose to the surface again. So I think it's very important to stick together, to stand up for ourselves and for our rights, and not to take anything for granted.
Well, that was my last question, so I thank you for speaking with us today.
My pleasure. That's a picture of me, Adrienne Lichtig Petruk, in 1949 in my stroller. And there I am with that special doll, Elizabeth, that I'm holding on to. And the picture was taken at Elizabeth Square, where I used to play.
In what town?
In Budapest.
City?
In Budapest, Hungary.
Thank you.
That's my doll, Elizabeth. The photograph was taken recently in my apartment, but the doll has survived all these years and has been everywhere with me for 81 years. What is special about it is that it was given to me by my very favorite and special aunt who saved my life. And it was one of the early plastic dolls, German made plastic dolls, about 18 inches tall. And when it was given to me in 1942, it was it was really extraordinary.
And your name, please?
My name is Adrienne Lichtig Petruk.
Thank you.
That is a photograph of me taken in Budapest, Hungary. I am Adrienne Lichtig Petruk, and I am next to my mother, Ilma Roth Lichtig. I would say that that might have been taken around 1944 or thereabouts. I look to be about 3 years old.
And where did you say it was taken?
In Budapest, Hungary. I am Adrienne Lichtig Petruk. That is a photograph album of my family's going back to the middle 1800s. The original book was velvet, and the sculpture on top of it was silver with my family's initials encrusted on it. And inside are photographs of all of my family members. And I do have a photograph of some of the family members that are taken inside. It's just rare to have such family lineage going back so many years for a Jewish family. Most people are lucky if they have pictures of their grandparents. And I noticed that many of the people inside this album have a strong resemblance to me, or is it the other way around? This photograph was taken in my apartment in New Jersey recently. But as I say, the album goes back to the 1860s.
And what countries are we talking about for your family?
My family was from.
Borders changed. So
my family was. All of them were Hungarian speaking. Some of them were born in parts of the world that changed borders and are Czech or the Ukraine. But they were all Hungarian nationals. Their mother language was Hungarian.
And you still have this photo album?
I gave it recently to the museum, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. It needed to be preserved because after all these years, the pages were falling apart. and I want this to be preserved because it really is a wonderful history of a Jewish family going back so many years and so many generations. I'm very proud of this book. It survived a lot.
Thank you.
These are, I am Adrienne Lichtig Petrock, and these are photographs of my family going back many generations. To the bottom left is a photograph of my paternal grandmother, Roja Lichtig, and to her right bottom is my grandfather, Sandor Lichtig, Sandor. The top left is Blanca Lichtig. Blanca lived long enough to come to America and was a guest at my wedding in 1966. To her right is somebody who I don't know, but a member of my family. I just don't know who it is. Some of these pictures are very old, and it's not somebody I knew in my lifetime in the upper right-hand corner. The pictures.
Do you know where these pictures were taken?
They were taken in and around Budapest. And well, my grandmother must have been born in the late 1800s. So here she looks to be maybe in her 30s. She lived to be 85. She was buried here in America. So they were taken they're not snapshots, they're professional photographs taken in studios, I think.
Is this part of the photo album you just shared with us?
Yes, that's what I'm showing you, the inside of some of the.
Can you tell us, please, how these photos and how this book survived?
My father's sister, who remained in Hungary, brought it with her physically to this country on one of her many visits. I don't know how she hid it or where it was hidden for all those years, but it never left the hands of family members. So, and it was pretty well preserved. Some of the pictures have fallen out now. The pictures themselves were made in a very fine way. They're on very heavy cardboard, maybe an eighth of an inch thick. They're really heavy, and they were made with the old-fashioned silver, whatever it is that they used. I think there was some silver powder in it or something, but they look amazing. The pictures themselves are in very good condition. It's the album that has suffered the most.
Thank you.
I'm Adrienne Lichtig Petrock. These are some of the interior shots of the previously looked at photo album of my family that goes back to the 1860s. The two people that I recognize, well, not recognize because I never met them, but the upper left-hand corner is Ignaz Roth, Roth, and that was my maternal grandfather. And to his right, the upper right-hand corner, might be a picture of, I want to say, my other grandfather, but I'm not really sure. The women on the bottom left and the one on the bottom right, I know they're all in the family, and all these photographs are studio shots, but I don't have the identity of who they are. They were taken.
Any idea? I'm sorry, just any idea when or where they might have been taken?
Before 1900. I don't know.
And where do you think they were taken, other than in a studio?
Well, I think they were taken in Hungary, Budapest, or it had to be a large city for it to have a sustaining professional photographer.
Okay, thank you.
This is Adrian Lichtig Petruk, and you're looking at a photograph taken in Hungary of my paternal grandfather's shoe factory. He had a factory for making baby shoes, which is what the sign says between them. My great grandfather is in the center picture, the man with the mustache in the center row. And I believe my father is the man second from the left in the first row with the hat on. He was a younger person on that picture.
Their names, please.
This grandfather's name was Sándor. Sándor Lichtig, and my father's name was Elek Lichtig. And again, this was taken in Hungary, in Budapest.
Any idea when?
My father was born in 1905. Maybe 1925, something like that.
Thank you.
This is Adrian Lichtig Petruk, and the image before you is the Army discharge papers of my great-great-grandfather from the Austro-Hungarian Army. It's a lithograph and it's beautiful. The drawings of the soldiers are amazing. My parents cherished all of their heritage and background. They were very proud of the family and the lineage, etc. So they kept everything and handed it down to me along with history of each piece. I also have the birth certificate for this great-great-grandfather.
His name?
Herman Lichtig. Herman.
And is there a date associated with this?
With the date of the discharge, yes, but I can't see it from where I am.
It probably shows up on the camera. That's okay.
It couldn't be 1820. They didn't have pictures then. Can I touch this?
No, it's okay. Okay.
Well, I think that my father's sister Ella she was the oldest of that generation. She kept all these things, and her apartment wasn't bombed. She's the one that kept the family album that I showed earlier. And as I'm the last one in the family to have that last name, Lichtig, I was lucky enough to have all these documents and papers that are so dear to me. Not many people can show their family history going back as far as mine.
Thank you.
This is Adrian Lichtig Petruk with a photograph of the woman who hid me in the little town of Buji during the Holocaust. Her name is Ilona. I never knew her last name. And this is not what she looked like when she was taking care of me. This was a much later picture. She looked like a country girl beforehand. But within the last 10 years, her family were in touch with me and they sent me this updated photograph.
Any idea
where it was taken? No, it looks to be a studio portrait, but I don't have any idea where it was taken.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Adrian Lichtig Petruk again with a hang tag that was tied onto me on my voyage to America on a DP ship. I was a displaced person. I came here on the SS General Bletchford, and my name is on the bottom, Lichtig Adrien, and I am C. My father was A, my mother was B, and I was C. picture
And
was
can you put
taken.
this in a time frame?
Yes, this tag was in 1950, November of 1950, when we came to America. And this was our identifier as a displaced person. You can see the number across the top.
Thank you.
This is Adrienne Lichtig Petrock with a relief portrait of my mother, Ilma Roth Lichtig, which was created by my father in Salzburg, Austria in 1949 while we were waiting to emigrate to the United States.
Thank you. And this now concludes the interview.